was July 1945. Harry S. Truman was bound for Europe at a meeting of the Grand Alliance, a coalition of the three leading Allied powers of World War II. The American president was poised between two of history's greatest battles, the World War that was ending and the Cold War that would replace it. Monumental issues confronted Truman and his wartime partners. The control of defeated Germany, post-war boundaries, winning the war with Japan, securing a lasting peace for Europe.
There's not one piece of territory or one thing of a monetary nature that we want out of this war. We want peace and prosperity for the world as a whole.
Victory over Germany had restored peace to Europe, but it was already threatened by a growing rift between the partners themselves. At the Potsdam Conference, President Truman and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill were on one side of the divide, determined to secure political freedom and democratic governments throughout post-war Europe. Their partner, the dictator of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, had other plans.
Well, what was the first thing you remember hearing about, like, the conflict of the Soviet Union and the U.S.?
Well, the first thing, I think, Kennedy and Khrushchev were going back and forth, and of course that's when the atomic bombs were prevalent and so on, and they had I believe, I may be wrong on this, but it seems to me they had it was either in the United Nations or one of the presidents or Khrushchev visited the country. But anyway, they got in an argument and so on and so forth. And it was at the same time that Cuba had Castro as this rebel and so forth, and he organized his group.
Fidel Castro whips up a furor in Cuba, charging the United States with arming and training mercenary forces for an imminent invasion. He calls out some 200,000 militiamen for training and guard duty at key points throughout Havana in a move timed to coincide with the landing of about 1,400 American Marines at the Guantanamo Naval Base for a weekend of liberty after training exercises in the Caribbean. Castro's invasion scare also enlivens the eve of a debate in the United Nations on Cuban charges of aggression by the United States. Meanwhile, in Moscow, an expert at fishing in troubled waters reels out the line of friendship to a group of newsmen and women from Cuba, present at the invitation of the Soviet Journalists League. Khrushchev happily receives a gift of the Cuban flag as he lines up with a solid endorsement for the home-brewed anti-Americanism of Fidel Castro, the Soviet sole Western Hemisphere ally.
Castro was a dictator in Cuba and had the support of thousands of people in his country, which he then took advantage of and wanted to invade the other Dominican islands in the Western Hemisphere. Although he wanted to be well known around the world, he had a perfect partner, the communist leader of Russia, and here are some things that he also achieved.
He survived secret CIA plots, undercover mafia assassination attempts, and even the threat of nuclear annihilation.
The weapons of war must be abolished.
He turned Cuba from a colonial paradise into a player on the world stage.
Our troubles in this hemisphere are being generated by Castro's Cuba.
This is the story of Fidel Castro, a communist icon who's ruled Cuba for half a century. A dictator only 90 miles from U.S. shores, who's outlasted 9 American presidents.
Besides the dictatorship of Castro, many people in Berlin and Europe were caused trouble by a wall that was built by the Soviet Union, which separated many family and friends. Here's what Ed has to say about this.
I remember that that was another big turmoil. I don't know if it was about the same time, but anyway, that's when after the Second World War, of course, because the Russians and the Americans both got into Germany about the same time and so forth, and Berlin was a prize. They decided that part of it would be controlled by Russia and part of it would be controlled by the Americans. And then the Russians wanted to make sure, so they put in the Berlin Wall because I guess they were a little oppressive or meaner to the Germans than on the American side, and they realized that they were going to lose a lot of the Germans because they didn't want to go.
The Berlin Wall evolved from a temporary border of barbed wire fencing to a heavy fortified concrete barrier with numerous guards, tank traps, and other obstacles. It encircled the city of West Berlin and stretched approximately 100 miles. The wall was 11 to 13 feet high. Over 100,000 people attempted to escape over the wall. Between 5,000 to 10,000 people succeeded. Approximately 200 people were killed while trying to escape. Many of them were shot by guards or had a fatal accident. Although the Berlin Wall separated many family and friends in Berlin, Ed Buckman wanted me to share a story about his personal friend, Gordon C. Beadle, which him going to war crushed him, but he wanted me to share this with you, and this is what he had to say about it.
As a high school friend or a school friend of hers from when she was much younger, who had a son about the same age, and said, "In Vito, live here, and I'll pay you a little something." So that's what happened. And Vito lived with these other people. He'd see his mother now and then, but he really feels these other people were like his mother and father. Anyway, to make 18 years old, I think he was still in high school. He may have been a senior in high school. But when he was 17 years old, he went to his mother and said, "I want to join the Army." She says, "Over my dead body." He thought, I went to the wrong person. He went to his stepfather, who of course is an Army man. Said the same thing. He said, "Sure, I'll sign." So he signed, got his wife to sign, and he went into the military. And the condition he had when he went into the military, we weren't involved in Vietnam at the time, was just before Vietnam came about. He wanted to go back to Europe because he could speak fluent German. Austria speaks German. So he wanted to go back there to these people who really raised him. I mean, he felt they were more his parents than these other two. So anyway, when he went and saw the recruiter, he said, "Now, I want to join, but I want to make sure that my overseas duty is in Europe." And the guy said, "No problem, no problem." Well, after he got through with basics, Vietnam had started.
Gordon C. Beadle was the leader of 8 men in Vietnam. He specialized in getting rid of enemy booby traps by using his own explosives. Although this was a very hard and difficult job, he still managed to get rid of thousands of enemy mines. Although he was a very good leader, he lost his right leg, which led him to retire in 1969. The term Cold War is a description of a state of the world during a certain period. What this meant is that rather than fight each other directly in what would have probably led to a nuclear exchange, the US and the USSR engaged in a number of proxy wars around the world. For example, Beadle fought in the Vietnam War, which was also a proxy war, which the US backed up South Vietnam and the USSR backed up North Vietnam. Because of it being a proxy war, there were thousands of casualties, but the US and the USSR never fought face to face. The Cold War was a very scary time and era for many people. Although the UN declares that world peace will soon be achieved, many of us would ask if it is actually possible when there are still nuclear weapons around.